The air brake hissed like a punctured lung as I yanked the lever, and the whole goddamn consist 116 cars of FEMA supplies, medical equipment, and somewhere back in the middle, 3 refrigerated boxcars full of H7N4 vaccine. Shuddered to a stop outside Terre Haute. Well, outside what used to be Terre Haute before the quarantine went up and the National Guard pulled back to Indianapolis. My hand was still on that brake when Dex came through from the second unit, wiping his face with a rag that had more grease on it than his coveralls. "Signal's dead ahead," he said. "Manual override box is half a mile up, but it's exposed. No cover." Course it is. I checked the fuel gauge, 3/4 on the lead unit, 7/8 on the trailing. Plenty to make St. Louis if we could just keep moving. That word was doing a lot of work lately. How long to bypass it? 20 minutes if nobody shoots at me. Dex wasn't smiling. He never smiled anymore, not since we'd found that crew outside Effingham. What was left of them, anyway. Scattered along the right-of-way like somebody'd thrown a bag of meat out of a moving truck. Could be squatters in the yard office. Could be militia. Could be regular folks who just want what we're hauling. Regular folks don't usually open fire with ARs. Regular folks don't usually starve to death in the richest country in the world, Miles. Funny how things change. He was right about that. 3 months ago, I was hauling grain to Decatur, worried about my pension and whether Karen would finally sign the divorce papers. Now I was running vaccines through the collapse of the American Midwest, trying not to think about whether St. Louis even still had power or if this whole run was just an expensive way to deliver spoiled medicine to corpses. I grabbed the radio. "Tabitha, you copy?" Static. Then her voice from the mid-train helper unit where she was riding as the second engineer. "Copy, lead. We're stopped for signal work. Dex is going up to bypass. Keep your eyes open and the doors locked." "Always do." She paused. "There's smoke southeast of us. Big fire, looks like." I leaned out the window. Sure enough, a black column rising maybe 2 miles off, thick and oily. Structure fire, probably, wood frame house or a warehouse, something that had been bone dry after 6 weeks without rain. The quarantine zone stretched from the Ohio River to the Mississippi, Evansville to Bloomington, and every little town inside that line was either locked down tight or burning. Sometimes both. "Noted," I said. "Anything moves toward the train, sound 3 and lay on the horn." "You think they'd be stupid enough?" "Yeah," I said. "I do." Dex was already climbing down, tool bag over his shoulder. I watched him jog up the ballast toward the signal mast, moving like he'd done this 1,000 times. Maybe he had. Used to be, working for Burlington Northern Santa Fe meant showing up at the yard, coupling your power to whatever manifest the dispatcher gave you, and following the signals west until your shift ended. Now it meant navigating dead zones and quarantine checkpoints, dodging roadblocks thrown up by county sheriffs or self-appointed protection committees, trying to figure out which bridges the militias had mined and which ones just had the usual deferred maintenance that had been killing this industry since before I was born. My phone buzzed. No signal, but the text came through on the railroad's private network. Some kind of satellite relay they jury-rigged after the cell towers started going dark. It was from Holloway, the trainmaster back in Chicago. Military reports militia activity at Deadfall Junction. Barricades on main line. Reroute via southern bypass or hold position. Deadfall Junction. That was the old nickname for the crossing at Lawrenceville, where 3 branch lines met the main line like spokes on a broken wheel. Back in the day, it was a busy interchange point. Back before the branch lines got torn up for scrap and the grain elevators closed and the whole town withered down to 600 people living in houses their grandparents had bought for cash. Now it was the western edge of the quarantine zone, the last place you could turn south toward Evansville or north toward Indianapolis without crossing into open militia country. I texted back, "Southern bypass adds 6 hours. Vaccine temps already borderline. Need to push through." The reply came fast, "Your call. Company policy says hold for escort." Company policy also says deliver on schedule. How long for escort? Unknown. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow the vaccine would be warm goo in expensive boxes. Tomorrow those 3 refrigerated cars would be rolling coffins, and whoever was supposed to get those doses in St. Louis would be part of the 40% mortality rate instead of the 2% rate that vaccination bought you. I looked at the fuel gauge again, the route chart, the declining temp readouts from the reefer cars that Tabitha had been texting me every hour, each one a little higher than the last despite the diesel generators grinding away back there. Pushing through, I typed, "Will advise." Dex had the signal box open now, crouched in front of it with his multi-tool. Even from here I could see how exposed he was. Nothing but flat Indiana farmland in every direction, brown and dead-looking under the haze. The corn had died back in July when the irrigation systems failed. The soybeans had tried to hang on through August, but without fertilizer deliveries or anyone left to harvest them, they'd just gone to weeds and dust. The radio crackled. "Miles, this is Tabitha. Movement at 7 o'clock, about half a mile out." I grabbed the binoculars. It took me a second to find it. A truck, maybe a Silverado, dark blue or black, crawling along a farm road parallel to the tracks. No lights, 2 people in the cab, at least one in the bed. "I see it," I said. "Dex, how's that signal coming?" "Almost there. 2 more minutes." The truck stopped. I watched through the binocs as the people in the bed stood up. One of them had something long and dark in his hands. The other was... The window behind me exploded. Not glass, thankfully, just the plastic deflector on the side window, but the crack of the rifle shot rolled across the fields a second later, a flat, hard sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Contact! Tabitha was already laying on the horn. 3 long blasts that shook the whole consist. Contact right side. I dropped the binoculars and shoved the throttle forward, which did exactly nothing because we were still sitting on a red signal and Burlington Northern's computer system wasn't going to let me override that without Dex completing the bypass. Another shot. This one hit the cab roof with a sound like someone had dropped a wrench on sheet metal. I ducked reflexively, even though the bullet was already gone, already somewhere behind me in the mess of gauges and switches that made up the engineer's station. "Dex!" I keyed the radio with one hand while reaching for the override switch with the other. "Dex, we're taking fire. I need that signal." 30 seconds. The truck was moving again, accelerating toward the tracks. I could see the shooter in the bed now, braced against the roll bar, working the bolt on what looked like a hunting rifle. Probably thought this was easy. Shoot up the cab, force us to stop, take whatever they wanted from the 100+ cars of supplies rolling through their dead county. They didn't understand that a train isn't like a semi you can force off the road. A train goes where the rails go, and it only stops when the engineer decides it stops or when the laws of physics make that decision for you. The signal ahead flicked from red to yellow. I slammed the throttle into run 8 and felt the lead engine dig in, all 4,400 horsepower translating into raw pulling force as the traction motors spun up and the whole consist, 7,000 tons of steel and supplies, lurched forward. The truck swerved to follow us. Another shot, and this time I heard it ping off the fuel tank, close enough to make my hands shake as I gripped the controls. "Dex, we're rolling." He was running now, tool bag bouncing against his back, sprinting alongside the ballast as the train picked up speed. I throttled back just enough to give him a chance. We were doing maybe 8 miles an hour when he grabbed the ladder and hauled himself up, swinging into the nose door just as another round smacked into the frame where his head had been. "Friendly goddamn people out here," he gasped, slamming the door. I opened the throttle back up. We were doing 15 now, 20. The truck was falling behind. They could pace us on the road, maybe, but we were a mile-long string of momentum, and once we got moving it took an act of God to slow us down. Or a barricade. "Tab, status on those reefers?" "Holding at 38 degrees, she said, "but generator 3 is sputtering." I think we got debris in the fuel line. 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The vaccine needed to stay between 32 and 46, and every degree above that shortened its shelf life, made it less effective, turned those 3 refrigerated boxcars from shipment into expensive garbage. Can you fix it? Not while we're moving. I'd have to climb out on the catwalk and... Then we don't stop. Silence on the radio. Finally, Miles, if that generator quits, the whole car goes warm in 30 minutes. We'll lose everything. If we stop, those militia boys catch up and we lose everything anyway. Plus probably our lives. I checked the speed, 25 now, the engine settling into the rhythm that told me we were clear of the yard limits. We push to Deadfall Junction. Holloway says there's barricades. But you want to ram them. I want to assess the situation, I said, and then probably ram them, yeah. Dex was checking the bullet holes in the cab, running his finger along the gouges in the plastic and metal. You know what's going to happen when we get to Lawrenceville, right? They're going to have the whole town out there. They're going to want these supplies. They can want all they like. These vaccines go to St. Louis or they go to nobody. St. Louis might not even be there anymore, Miles. Last report I saw said they were burning bodies in the parking lots at Barnes Jewish. Then we deliver them to the parking lots. I kept my eyes on the track ahead, watching for washouts or debris. You didn't sign up for this run, Dex. Neither of you did. You want off? I'll slow down at the next crossover and you can walk back to... To what? He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. My apartment's in the quarantine zone. My sister's in a camp outside Louisville. My ex won't return my calls, and honestly, I don't blame her. You know what I got to go back to, Miles? Nothing. Same as you. Same as Tabitha. So yeah, I signed up for this run, and I'll ride it all the way to wherever the hell it ends. The track ahead was straight as a ruler, cutting through dead farmland. I pushed the throttle to notch 8 and felt the engines digging harder, the consist stretching out behind us like a steel snake. Somewhere back there were boxcars full of antibiotics, flat cars loaded with generators, tankers full of diesel fuel. Somewhere back there were those 3 reefer cars, their compressors grinding away, fighting to keep a few thousand doses of vaccine cold enough to save lives. And ahead of us was Deadfall Junction, where the rails crossed the county road and the militia had decided that this was where the United States of America ended and their new world began. The sun was setting by the time we cleared Vincennes, painting the whole western horizon the color of an infected wound, red and purple and sick yellow. I'd been watching the fuel gauge drop for the last hour, doing math in my head that didn't add up the way I wanted it to. We've got maybe 60 miles of runtime left on the lead unit, Dex said, reading my mind. Trailing unit's good for 80. After that, we're coasting. St. Louis is 110 from Deadfall Junction. Yeah. He didn't say the rest, that if we burned too much fuel punching through whatever barricade they'd set up, we might not make it to the city. Might end up stranded in the middle of Illinois with 7,000 tons of dead weight and no way to move it. Tabitha, I radioed, give me the bad news. Generator 3 just quit. Car 27 is climbing past 40 degrees. Car 39 is holding at 36, but that won't last. Car 41. She paused. Car 41 is doing fine. Generator 1 is a goddamn champion. 2 out of 3 reefer cars failing. I pulled out my phone and checked the consist sheet. Car 27 had 800 doses. Car 39 had 1,200. Car 41 had 2,000. If we lost the first 2, we'd still have 2,000 doses to deliver, which was better than 0 but a hell of a lot worse than 4,000. How long until 27 goes bad? 4H7N4? If the car hits 50 degrees, maybe 2 hours before the vaccine degrades past efficacy. Call it 90 minutes to be safe. I checked my watch. We were still 40 miles from Deadfall Junction. Another 70 to St. Louis after that. assuming we didn't derail trying to ram whatever obstacle the militia had cooked up. The math was getting worse. Can you hotwire Generator 3 back to life? I'd need to stop the train and climb out on the catwalk in the dark while we're sitting still in hostile territory. That's a no then. That's a hell no. Her voice crackled with something between frustration and fear. Miles, we did what we could. 2/3 of the shipment is still good. That's 2,000 people who don't die screaming in hospital hallways. That's not nothing. It's not 4,000. No, she agreed. It's not. The radio went quiet. Outside, the landscape was flattening out as we rolled west. Less trees, more open fields, the kind of terrain where you could see trouble coming from miles away but had nowhere to hide when it arrived. Dex was studying the track chart, the paper kind that nobody used anymore except when the computers went down and you needed to know where the hell you actually were. Deadfall Junction's a controlled siding, he said. 3 crossovers, 1 main, 2 branch lines that haven't seen traffic in 5 years. There's a signal bridge over the crossing where Route 50 meets the tracks. How heavy's the bridge? Steel gantry, built in the 70s. Probably rated for. Why are you asking how heavy the bridge is, Miles? Because if they've got the main line blocked with something we can't push through, maybe we can take a branch line around it. The branch lines are torn up. No ballast, no ties in half the places. We derail in the first 100 yards. Then we don't take the branch line. I kept my eyes on the track, watching for the distant glow of lights that would tell me we were approaching the junction. We take the main and push through whatever they've put in front of us. And if it's concrete barriers, old cars filled with scrap, a semi-truck, then I hope our plow is better than their barricade. The plow was a chunk of angled steel bolted to the front of the lead locomotive, designed to shove debris off the rails. Deer carcasses, fallen trees, abandoned cars at grade crossings. It wasn't rated for ramming military-grade obstacles, but then again, nothing about this run was rated for what we were actually doing. My phone buzzed again. Holloway. Recon reports 20 to 30 individuals at junction. Armed. Recommend you hold position and wait for guard escort. I didn't bother responding. The National Guard wasn't coming. They were too busy holding the perimeter of the quarantine zone, shooting anyone who tried to cross the line, whether they were infected or just desperate. A train full of vaccine was low on their priority list compared to keeping the whole Midwest from going up in flames. There, Dex pointed at the horizon, where a faint cluster of lights marked Lawrenceville. That's deadfall. I throttled back slightly, bleeding off speed. We were doing 40 now, fast enough to have momentum but slow enough that I could see what we were heading into before we committed to ramming through it. The radio crackled. Not Tabitha this time, but an unfamiliar voice, male, with the flat vowels of Southern Illinois. Train approaching on mainline, this is Lawrenceville Civil Defense. You are ordered to stop immediately for inspection. I picked up the handset. This is Burlington Northern Santa Fe Freight 179er, bound for St. Louis with FEMA medical supplies. We're on federal orders and we're not stopping. You don't have a choice. We've blocked the line. Then you're interfering with interstate commerce and federal disaster relief. Clear the line. The voice laughed, not amused, just tired. Mister, there is no interstate commerce anymore. There's no federal government, not out here. There's just us and you got supplies we need. These supplies are going to St. Louis. St. Louis is a mass grave. I got a cousin who was a cop there, and he called me last week to say they're shooting looters in the street and burning the bodies in the old stadium parking lot. You take your supplies there, you're feeding corpses. These aren't supplies, I said. They're vaccines. H7N4. 3,000 doses. 4,000, Dex muttered. And they have to stay cold or they're worthless. You want to save lives in Lawrenceville, you let us through so we can save lives in St. Louis. Silence on the radio. Then, we need those vaccines here. We got people dying, same as anywhere. Maybe more. You stop and unload half of what you're carrying. We'll let you through with the rest. Can't do that. Refrigeration's already failing. We stop, we lose the whole shipment. Then I guess you got a problem. The lights of Lawrenceville were closer now, resolving into individual buildings, houses, a water tower, the skeletal frame of what used to be a grain elevator. And there, across the tracks where Route 50 crossed the main line, I could see the barricade. A semi-trailer jackknifed across both rails, with what looked like concrete blocks piled in front and behind it. Dex, what's our angle of approach? He checked the chart. Dead straight. No curves for the last 3 miles. Plow rating. Officially, 1,500 pounds at 20 miles an hour. He looked at me. That truck probably weighs 40,000 empty. Loaded with concrete blocks. Maybe 80. So we'll need more speed. Miles. What's the worst that happens? We derail and dump the whole consist in a cornfield? At least it'll make a hell of a statement. The worst that happens is we hit that barrier at 50 miles an hour and accordion the front 3 units into scrap metal with us inside them. I pushed the throttle forward. We were accelerating now, the engines roaring, the whole consist picking up momentum like a punch being wound back. 30 miles an hour. 35. Train 179er, this is your final warning. Stop now or we will open fire. Tabitha, I radioed, get away from the windows and brace yourself. We're going through. Jesus, Miles. I know. 40 miles an hour now. The barricade was maybe a mile ahead, clearly visible under the lights they'd set up. I could see people moving around it, at least a dozen figures with rifles. I know. Dex grabbed the dashboard. This is insane. Yeah, I agreed, but it's the only play we've got. 45 miles an hour. The whole cab was shaking now, the engine noise rising to a roar. I could see individual faces at the barricade, people scrambling back from the tracks as they realized we weren't stopping. 50 miles an hour. The first shots came when we were a quarter mile out, the distinctive crack of rifle fire, bullets pinging off the nose of the locomotive. I ducked instinctively, even though the cab was armored, even though there was nowhere to hide. Hold on, I shouted, and then we hit. The impact was like being inside a car crash and an explosion at the same time. The plow caught the trailer's undercarriage and lifted. I actually saw the whole truck rise up on the front of our locomotive like we were a forklift, and then the trailer twisted sideways with a screech of tearing metal and the concrete blocks scattered like bowling pins, and we were through, plowing over the wreckage, dragging pieces of the truck underneath us as the drivers squealed and sparked. Something was on fire behind us, either the trailer or one of our own cars, I couldn't tell, and Dex was yelling something I couldn't hear over the noise, and the whole consist was shuddering like it wanted to come apart. But we were through. We were through the barricade and accelerating again, and Lawrenceville was falling behind us, and ahead of us was another 70 miles of dark track leading to St. Louis. I throttled back, letting our speed bleed off to something sane. My hands were shaking. My ears were ringing. There was blood on my lip. I'd bitten through it when we hit the barricade, and I could taste copper. Tabitha, I croaked into the radio. Status. Nothing. Tabitha. Static. Then her voice, shaky but alive. I'm okay. I'm okay. The reefer cars are okay. We lost. I think we lost car 49. It's leaning hard to the right. Might have damaged a truck when we hit. Car 49 was a boxcar full of antibiotics. If it derailed, we'd have to cut it loose and leave it, which would slow us down, burn more fuel, give the vaccine less time. Can we keep rolling? Yeah, I think so. But Miles, we can't do that again. The consist won't take it. We won't have to, I said, hoping it was true. That was Deadfall Junction. After this, it's clear track to St. Louis. You hope. I hope, I agreed. Behind us, Lawrenceville was burning, whether from our passage or from something else I couldn't tell and didn't care. The speedometer was climbing back to 40, the engines settling into their rhythm. Dex was staring at the fuel gauge, doing math in his head. We're going to be running on fumes by the time we hit the city, he said. Then we better not stop. He looked at me. You really think there's anyone left in St. Louis to take this vaccine? Doesn't matter what I think. Matters what I do. And what I did was keep the throttle open, keep the train rolling west through the dark, keep those refrigeration units grinding away against the heat, keep moving because movement was the only thing between us and failure. Behind us, the night was full of fires. Ahead of us, St. Louis waited, or didn't wait, or had stopped waiting months ago when the power grid failed and the hospitals overflowed and the government retreated behind its quarantine lines. But we were going to find out. St. Louis came up out of the dark like a ghost city, or maybe a dying city, which was worse. The skyline was wrong. I'd rolled into St. Louis hundreds of times over my 20 years on the railroad, and I knew that skyline the way I knew my own face in the mirror. The gateway arch catching the sun, the clustered towers downtown, the long, low sprawl of the industrial district along the river. Now half the lights were out. Whole blocks dark, fires burning in the gaps like gaps in a smile full of rotten teeth. Jesus, Dex breathed. It's worse than I thought. It was worse than any of us thought. We were rolling through the eastern suburbs now, Fairview Heights, Collinsville, and the destruction wasn't from the virus, it was from people. Burned out strip malls. Cars abandoned across intersections. A Walmart with its roof caved in and black smoke still rising from the wreckage. The radio crackled. Train 179er, this is St. Louis Dispatch. We've been trying to raise you for the last hour. What's your status? I keyed the handset. This is 179er. We're 20 minutes out with FEMA medical supplies and 4,000 doses of H7N4 vaccine. I paused. Make that 2,000 doses. We lost 2 refrigeration units. Copy that. We're routing you to the old Anheuser-Busch facility on South Broadway. There's a loading dock still operational and a guard unit standing by to secure the shipment. What's the temperature situation there? We need cold storage immediately. We've got generators and a field hospital. The vaccine will be viable. The dispatcher's voice was flat, exhausted. Listen, 179er, when you get here, don't stop for anything. Don't open your doors. Don't engage with anyone outside the secured perimeter. We've had incidents. What kind of incidents? The kind where people who are scared and desperate do things they wouldn't normally do. Just get here fast, get unloaded, and we'll get you back out to wherever you're going next. Wherever we were going next. Like there was a next. Like Burlington, Northern Santa Fe still existed as anything more than a name on the side of a locomotive. Copy that, I said. 20 minutes. I checked the fuel gauge. We had maybe 30 miles of range left on fumes and prayers. The good news was St. Louis was only 15 miles ahead. The bad news was that every mile between here and there looked like a war zone. Dex was watching the track ahead through the windscreen, his face pale in the glow of the cab lights. Movement on the left, he said quietly. Lot of movement. I followed his gaze. There, in the shadows alongside the tracks, people. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. They weren't running at us, weren't shooting, just watching. As we passed, I saw their faces in the locomotive's headlights. Hollow-eyed, gaunt, desperate. Refugees, Tabitha said over the radio. She'd been quiet since Deadfall Junction, probably still processing how close we'd come to dying there. They're living in the rail yards, anywhere the guard isn't patrolling. Are they infected? Does it matter? They're starving either way. The train rolled on. We passed an overturned FEMA trailer, its contents scattered across the ballast, pallets of water bottles, MRE boxes, medical supplies. People were picking through the wreckage like gulls on a garbage heap. My phone buzzed. Holloway. Reports of track obstruction at Broadway crossing. Proceed with caution. Dex, how much caution do we have left? After deadfall? None. We're running on spite and momentum. Good. That's all I got left anyway. The Broadway crossing came up fast. I saw the obstruction immediately. Not a barricade this time, but a crowd. 50 people, maybe more, packed across the tracks. Some of them were holding signs. Some were holding guns. Stop the train! Someone was shouting through a bullhorn. Stop the train and share the supplies. I didn't slow down. Miles, Dex started. We stop, we die. They might shoot us, they might rush the train, but either way we don't make the delivery. I kept the throttle steady, kept the speed at 20 miles per hour. They'll move. And if they don't? Then Darwin was right about natural selection. The crowd held their ground until we were 100 feet out, then 50, then 20, and then, finally, blessedly, they scattered, diving off the tracks as the locomotive bore down on them like a steel god that didn't care about their signs or their guns or their desperation. A few shots rang out as we passed, angry, futile gestures that pinged off the armor plating. One of them hit the windscreen and left a star-shaped crack right in my line of sight. Contact rear, Tabitha called. They're trying to climb onto the cars. I watched in the mirror as figures ran alongside the consist, grabbing at ladders, pulling themselves up onto the boxcars and flat cars. They weren't soldiers or militia, just people who saw a moving train and thought maybe, just maybe, it was their ticket out of hell. Let them ride, I said. We're almost there. Miles. Let them ride. We start shooting refugees, we're no better than. I caught myself. Just let them ride. The Anheuser-Busch facility came into view. A sprawling brick complex that used to make beer and now apparently made a refugee camp. The loading dock was lit up with portable floodlights, and I could see soldiers, actual National Guard, not militia, forming a perimeter around the unloading area. I started braking. The air hoses groaned, the brake shoes squealed, and slowly, so slowly, the train began to decelerate. We were rolling at 10 miles per hour when I saw the second obstruction. This one wasn't a crowd. This was a technical, a pickup truck with a machine gun mounted in the bed, parked across the track leading to the loading dock. And standing in front of it was a man in a guard uniform who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. I brought the train to a full stop 50 feet from the truck, set the brakes, and picked up the radio. This is Burlington Northern 179er to St. Louis Dispatch. We've got an armed vehicle blocking our approach to the loading dock. Please advise. The dispatcher's voice came back tight. 179er, that's not one of ours. We're sending a unit to clear them, but we need you to hold position. We can't hold position. We've got refugees on the train and the vaccine's going warm. I checked my watch. Car 27 had been at 45 degrees for the last hour. It was probably a write-off by now. I'm going to need that truck moved in the next 5 minutes or we're going to have a situation. I understand, but... I put down the radio and grabbed my jacket. Dex, keep the engine idling. Tabitha, lock your doors and stay on the radio. I'm going down there. Miles, that's not. I know it's not smart, but we didn't come 400 miles just to sit here and watch the vaccine spoil. I climbed down from the cab with my hands visible. No weapons, just a middle-aged freight conductor in a dirty BNSF jacket walking toward a machine gun. The man in the guard uniform didn't lower his rifle. That's far enough, he said. His name tape read Richardson. This train's under military authority. You're going to unload everything here, and we'll distribute it as needed. Under whose authority? I stopped about 10 feet from him, close enough to talk, far enough to run if he started shooting. Last I checked, FEMA still has operational control of disaster relief. FEMA doesn't exist out here anymore. It's just us. And we need those supplies. These supplies are for St. Louis. This is St. Louis. This facility, this perimeter, these 200 people we're trying to keep alive. This is all that's left. Richardson's voice cracked. You want to drive your vaccine to the empty hospitals downtown? Fine. But there's nobody there to receive it. Nobody left to give it to. Just us. I looked past him at the loading dock. The soldiers, the refugees huddled in the shadows, the generators running to power the lights and the field hospital. Your guard, I said. Where's your chain of command? Dead, deserted, infected. Take your pick. He gestured at the facility with his rifle. I've got 60 soldiers left, and half of them are only here because they don't have anywhere else to go. We can keep this place running for maybe another week if we get those supplies. Or you can drive off into the dark and we all die here. And St. Louis? St. Louis is gone, friend. Accept it. Behind me, I heard the locomotive's engine change pitch, decks revving it slightly, a reminder that we still had momentum, still had the option to ram through this last obstacle the same way we'd rammed through Deadfall Junction. I looked at Richardson, at his hollow eyes and his shaking hands and his uniform that was 3 sizes too big, like he'd lost weight from skipped meals and bad sleep. I looked at the machine gun pointed at my train, at the refugees who'd climbed onto my cars, looking for a way out, at the soldiers who were just trying to survive another day in the collapse of everything they'd been trained to protect. Then I looked back at the locomotive, at Dex watching me through the cracked windscreen, at Tabitha somewhere back in the consist, guarding those refrigeration units like they were the Holy Grail. And I thought about the 2,000 doses of vaccine in car 41, about the 1,200 doses in car 39 that were probably already too warm, about the 800 doses in car 27 that were definitely garbage by now. I thought about Chicago, where Holloway was probably sitting in a dispatch office wondering if I was dead, about Karen, wherever she was, who'd signed the papers 3 months ago and hadn't called since, about my pension, which didn't matter anymore because there probably wasn't a Burlington Northern Santa Fe to pay it. I thought about duty and what that word meant when the world you'd sworn duty to had already collapsed. How many people you got here? I asked Richardson. 200, give or take. More coming in every day. And downtown? The hospitals? There's maybe 50 people at Barnes Jewish. Doctors mostly and patients too sick to move. They've got power for another week, maybe less. So 50 people downtown versus 200 here. The math was simple. The morality wasn't. I turned and walked back to the locomotive, climbed up, and keyed the radio. Tabitha, what's the status on car 41? Still holding at 36 degrees. This good vaccine, Miles. All 2,000 doses. And the others? She hesitated. 27s at 52 degrees. That's a total loss. 39s at 48. Maybe salvageable, maybe not. I did the math. 2,000 good doses. Maybe 1,200 questionable doses. 800 write-offs. Dex, I said, can we uncouple car 41 here and run the rest of the consist downtown? He blinked. You're serious? Can we do it? Yeah, we'd have to do it manually, walk back to the car, pull the pin, disconnect the air hoses. 20 minutes, maybe. Do it. We'll leave 41 here with 2,000 doses for Richardson's people. Cars 27 and 39 go to Barnes Jewish. The rest of the consist, all the antibiotics and supplies, stays here. Miles, if 39's already warm, then the doctors downtown will figure it out. They're the experts, not us. I grabbed my jacket again. I'm going to tell Richardson the deal. You get that car uncoupled." Richardson was still standing by his technical when I walked back down. I stopped at the same spot, hands visible. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "We're giving you car 41, that's 2,000 doses of good vaccine, cold chain intact. We're also leaving the bulk of the supplies. Antibiotics, generators, fuel, food. Everything except the 2 questionable reefer cars. And those are going downtown, to Barnes Jewish, to the 50 people you said are still there." Richardson's jaw tightened. "You're giving us the scraps and taking the rest to die in an empty hospital?" "I'm giving you enough to keep 200 people alive and vaccinated. The doctors downtown will get 1,200 doses that might work or might not, and they can make that call themselves." I took a step forward. "You want to shoot me over that decision, go ahead. But my engineer's already uncoupling the car, and you'll have your supplies either way." We stared at each other. Behind him, I could see soldiers watching us, weapons ready but not raised. Behind me, I could hear Dex and Tabitha working on the coupling, the clank of metal on metal. Finally, Richardson lowered his rifle. "You're making the wrong call." "Probably," I agreed, "but it's my call to make. I'm the conductor, and this is my train." He stepped aside. The technical backed off the tracks, and I walked back to the locomotive, climbed in, and waited while Dex finished uncoupling car 41 from the rest of the consist. "We're clear," Dex radioed. "Car 41 is isolated. The rest of the train is ready to roll." I looked out at the loading dock, where soldiers were already moving toward the refrigerated car, ready to secure the vaccine. I looked at Richardson, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger, maybe, or respect, or just exhaustion. Then I released the brakes and opened the throttle, and we rolled away from the Anheuser-Busch facility with 115 cars instead of 116, heading downtown to deliver hope to 50 people who probably didn't know we were coming. Downtown St. Louis was a graveyard with streetlights. We rolled through neighborhoods that should have been full of people. Should have had traffic, sirens, life, and instead got nothing but silence and the occasional moving shadow that might have been a person or a dog, or just the wind pushing trash across empty intersections. The track curved along the riverfront, giving us a view of the arch standing alone against the sky like a monument to something that used to matter. I'd grown up in Missouri, had brought my daughter here when she was 6 to ride the tram to the top, had kissed Karen on the observation deck while the Mississippi rolled by below us. That was before the divorce, before the pandemic, before the word quarantine meant shooting people who tried to cross state lines. "There," Tabitha said over the radio, "that's Barnes Jewish." The hospital complex sprawled across several blocks, a cluster of modern buildings connected by skywalks and tunnels. Most of it was dark, whole wings with their windows black and empty. But one section, the older brick building on the corner, had lights burning on the lower floors. I could see a loading area adjacent to the rail siding, probably where they used to receive medical supplies back when the world had a functioning supply chain. Now it just had a single generator and a handful of people in scrubs standing under a portable light. I brought the train to a stop, set the brakes, and grabbed the radio. "This is BNSF 179er to Barnes Jewish Hospital. We're on the siding with medical supplies including approximately 1,200 doses of H7N4 vaccine. Temperature integrity is questionable. You'll need to assess it yourselves." A woman's voice came back, hoarse from exhaustion or smoke or both. 179er, this is Dr. Kajmarek. Are you telling me the vaccine might be compromised? Car 39 was running at 48 degrees for the last 3 hours. Car 27 was at 52. That one's definitely bad. But 39 might still be viable. We're not the experts on that. Silence on the radio. Then, how many people are still with you? 3 crew. Why? Because we've got 47 patients here and 6 staff including me, and we could use all the help we can get. I looked at Dex. He shrugged. Not like we've got anywhere else to be. Copy that, doctor. We'll assist with unloading and distribution. But after that, we need to figure out where this train goes next. 179er, there is no next. The rail system is shut down. The quarantine zones are closed. You put this train somewhere safe and hunker down like the rest of us. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I climbed down from the cab, Dex and Tabitha following, and we walked toward the loading dock where Dr. Kaczmarek was waiting with 2 nurses and what looked like a maintenance worker in hospital scrubs. Kaczmarek was maybe 50, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too much death lately and was done being surprised by it. "You're the crew." "We're the crew," I confirmed. "Miles Harper, conductor. This is Dex Okonkwo and Tabitha Fox, engineers." "Well, Miles Harper, you just drove 400 miles through a collapsed region to deliver vaccine that might not work to a hospital that's barely functioning. That's either heroic or stupid, and I haven't decided which." "Probably both," I admitted. "Where do you want the reefer cars?" "Right here is fine. We'll offload the vaccine, test it, and if it's still good, we'll start inoculating immediately." She looked past me at the consist. "What else is on this train?" "Antibiotics, mostly. Some generators, fuel, medical equipment. We left the bulk of it at the guard facility near the Anheuser-Busch plant." Her expression hardened. "You left it with Richardson? You know him? He was here 2 weeks ago. Took half our supplies at gunpoint and promised to redistribute them appropriately." She shook her head. "But I guess you had to make a choice. And at least you brought something to us instead of giving him everything." We spent the next 2 hours unloading. The vaccine came first, 1,200 vials packed in insulated containers, each one labeled with a temperature strip that showed its storage history. Kaczmarek and her nurses went through them methodically, checking each strip, sorting the doses into viable, questionable, and compromised piles. "Looks like about 800 good doses," she said finally. 300 questionable. We'll use those first and hope for the best. The rest," she gestured at the compromised pile. "At least you tried. 800 doses, not 2,000, not 4,000, but 800 people who might survive this thing instead of becoming part of the 40% mortality rate." I helped carry boxes into the hospital, through corridors that smelled like disinfectant and death. Most of the rooms were empty. Patient beds stripped, equipment unplugged, doors standing open like mouths frozen mid-scream. But in the occupied wing, the one with power, people were still fighting. An old man on a ventilator, his chest rising and falling in mechanical rhythm. A woman in her 30s, face covered in sweat, being tended by a nurse who looked ready to collapse herself. A kid, couldn't have been more than 10, sitting alone in a room watching a battery-powered TV that was showing nothing but static. "How many of these people are infected?" I asked Kaczmarek. "All of them. That's why they're here. They got sick, got brought in before the hospitals shut down, and now they're stuck. Some of them will survive. Most won't." She looked at me. "The vaccine doesn't cure the sick, Mr. Harper. It prevents infection in the healthy, which means you just saved 800 people who haven't gotten sick yet, assuming we can find them and assuming they trust us enough to take the shot." "Why wouldn't they trust you?" She laughed, bitter, exhausted. "Because half the country thinks the vaccine is a government conspiracy. Because the other half thinks it's already too late. Because people are scared and desperate, and they'll believe whatever story makes them feel like they have control over a situation that's completely out of control." We finished unloading around midnight. The antibiotics went into a secure room. The generators got hooked up to extend the hospital's power supply. The fuel went into the main tank, and the 800 doses of viable vaccine went into a freezer that was running on backup power and prayers. Dex and Tabitha were sitting on the loading dock, sharing a bottle of water that one of the nurses had given them. I sat down next to them, feeling every one of my 48 years in my back and knees. "So," Dex said, "what now?" "Now we figure out where to park this train and wait for someone to tell us what to do next." "And if nobody tells us?" I looked out at the consist 115 cars of empty boxcars and flat cars and tankers, a mobile monument to a transportation system that had probably just collapsed for good. 7,000 tons of steel with nowhere to go and no reason to get there. "Then we figure it out ourselves." Tabitha pulled out her phone, checked the railroad's satellite network. "I'm getting messages from other crews," she said quietly. "Lots of messages. They're saying the quarantine is expanding. Chicago's locked down. Indianapolis is burning. The National Guard is pulling back to—" She stopped. "They're pulling back to the coasts, abandoning the interior." "That's not possible," Dex said. "They can't just abandon." "They can't hold it," I interrupted. "Not with half the Guard infected or AWOL. Not with the supply lines cut and the cities in revolt. They're going to consolidate around the population centers they can defend and write off the rest." "Write off," Tabitha repeated. "You mean leave us to die?" "I mean let us figure it out ourselves." We sat in silence for a while, watching the empty streets of downtown St. Louis. Somewhere in the distance, a gunshot echoed off the buildings. Then another. Then nothing. "We could take the train north," Dex said finally. "There's a branch line that runs up to Alton, then another one that goes to Springfield. Maybe there's—" "There's nothing," I said. "There's just more empty towns and more desperate people and more fuel we don't have." I stood up, my back cracking. "The train stays here. We secure it, we strip out anything useful, and then we help these people hold this hospital as long as they can. And after that? After that, we find another run, another shipment, another reason to keep the trains moving." I looked at them both. "Because that's what we do. We're railroad people. We move things from one place to another, and we don't stop until someone tells us the line's shut down for good." "Miles," Tabitha said gently. "The line is shut down for good. Then we'll build a new one." 3 weeks later, I was standing in the cab of that same locomotive, watching the sun come up over what used to be southern Illinois and was now just territory, ungoverned space, the kind of place where the only law was what you could enforce and the only economy was what you could barter. We'd made 4 more runs since St. Louis. Short hauls mostly, 50 miles here, 80 there, moving supplies from one survivor camp to another. The vaccine was long gone, distributed to whoever would take it. The antibiotics were running low, but we'd picked up other cargo along the way. Refugees who needed transport, equipment salvaged from abandoned facilities, even livestock in one memorable trip where we'd loaded 3 dozen chickens into a boxcar and spent the whole run listening to them panic. Dex was still with me. So was Tabitha. We'd picked up 2 more crew, a former conductor named Rashid Mansour who'd been stranded in East St. Louis, and a mechanic called Svetlana Kowalski who could keep the engines running on spit and determination. 5 people running a railroad that didn't officially exist anymore, serving communities that weren't on any map. "Signal ahead," Rashid called from his position at the radio. "It's the Carbondale camp. They're saying they've got grain to trade for fuel." "How much grain?" "Enough to fill 10 cars. They want diesel in exchange, 50 gallons per car." I did the math. 500 gallons of diesel for 10 cars of grain, which we could trade in Cairo for medicine, which we could trade in Paducah for more fuel. It was a shell game, a constantly shifting equation of needs and resources, but it kept us moving. "Tell them we'll take the deal," I said, "but we need mechanical support too. The trailing unit's developing a hot bearing." "Copy that." I looked out at the track ahead, rough ballast, overgrown ties, rails that hadn't seen maintenance in months. This was the new reality, a rail system held together by improvisation and stubbornness, serving a region that the federal government had written off. But we were still running, still moving, still connecting people who would otherwise be isolated in their small towns and makeshift camps, cut off from the larger world that was trying to reconstitute itself on the coasts. My phone buzzed, the satellite network, still barely functional. A message from Dr. Kejmarek: vaccination rate in St. Louis region now 35%. Case mortality down to 8%. You saved lives. 8%. Still higher than it should have been, still lower than it would have been without that vaccine run. Not a victory exactly, but not a defeat either. I thought about Richardson at the Anheuser-Busch facility, about the 200 people there who'd gotten their vaccines because I'd left them car 41, about the 50 people at Barnes Jewish who'd gotten theirs from car 39, about the 800 doses that had worked and the 1,600 that hadn't. I thought about the barricade at Deadfall Junction and the way it felt when we'd smashed through it at 50 miles an hour. The way the trailer had lifted up on our plow like we were gods of steel and momentum. I thought about duty and what that word meant now that the world we'd known was gone. Miles, Tabitha called from the mid-train unit. I'm showing a temperature spike on car 73. Might be a brake dragging. Can you fix it? If we stop for 20 minutes. I checked the fuel gauge, the track chart, the schedule we'd cobbled together from radio calls and handwritten notes. We had 3 more stops before nightfall, 3 more communities counting on us to show up with supplies or information or just proof that the railroad still existed. We'll stop at the next siding, I said. Fix the brake, check the rest of the consist, refuel if we can. I paused. And then we keep rolling. Because that's what we did. That's what we'd always done. Even when the company dissolved and the government retreated and the infrastructure collapsed around us. We kept the trains moving because someone had to. Because the railroad wasn't just tracks and engines. It was the idea that you could still move things from one place to another, still connect people, still believe that the line ahead was open even when every signal said it was closed. The sun was higher now, painting the ruins of southern Illinois in shades of gold and rust. Ahead of us, the track curved west toward Carbondale. Behind us, St. Louis was fading into memory and smoke. And somewhere between the two, we were still running. 5 people and 115 cars of whatever we could carry, whatever people needed, whatever would keep them alive another day. The line wasn't shut down for good. Not yet. Not while we were still moving. I opened the throttle and felt the engines dig in, felt the whole consist stretch out behind us like a promise, and we rolled west into whatever came next. One more run, one more delivery, one more reason to believe that tomorrow we'd wake up and do it all again. Because we were railroad people. And the railroad never stops.